From as long as I can remember, mental disorders have both fascinated and terrified me. It has challenged everything I thought I knew about the human mind. In exploring these conditions, we confront not just the shadowy depths of mental illness, but also the resilience and the complexity of those who live with it. I've gathered a list of some of the most bizarre and disturbing, also lesser known mental disorders in this video. Without further ado, let's start the video. Cotard syndrome is basically a disorder that makes you believe that you are dead. The people suffering from this disorder feel like a walking corpse, convinced that their bodies are empty or decaying, even though everything physically seems fine. People with this condition might stop eating or taking care of themselves because, well, why would a dead person need food or hygiene? Some even believe they don't need medical help, which makes it really hard to treat. It's not just a weird thought, it's a deep, unshakable delusion that completely disconnects them from reality. It usually happens in people with severe depression, schizophrenia or brain injuries, but it's not clear what causes this disorder. We do know that it's often a symptom of a deeper medical problem that affects the brain, such as dementia. And while this sounds like something out of a horror movie, it's very real for those going through it. The good news are that with the right treatment, therapy and sometimes medication, people can come back from it and regain their sense of reality. There is no single treatment that will treat all cases though. Alien hand syndrome is like having a rebellious, out of control limb that does whatever it wants, completely ignoring your commands. Imagine trying to button up your shirt, but your other hand keeps unbuttoning it, like it has a mind of its own. Some people even feel like their hand is actively working against them, grabbing things, hitting them, or refusing to let go of objects. Someone with this disorder stated it doesn't only act in oppositional things, it also does things like bring a drink to your mouth, awaken you in the night, touching you without you wanting it to, in ways that make you feel so violated. Yet it's your own hand. It drums its finger, it points, gives thumbs up, much more complex than what people understand, which makes sense because it's so rare that it's extremely hard to study. It's also important to note that this only occurs when two hemispheres of the brain are unable to communicate effectively for some reason. There are theories that suggest that the hand acts if someone else controls it because it is a non-dominant hemisphere of the brain acting out to make its wants and needs known, which it would never have to do when the hemispheres are connected. Alice in Wonderland syndrome is like your brain suddenly deciding to mess with your perception of the world, making things look bigger, smaller, farther away or closer than they really are. Imagine looking at your hand and seeing it shrink right in front of you, or feeling your legs are stretching out like a cartoon characters. Sometimes even time feels weird, moving too fast or too slow. It's not just about sight. Some people feel like their own body is the wrong size, like their head is huge and light as a feather, or their arms are tiny. It can be pretty disorienting, almost like being trapped in a dream while awake. This is not an issue with your eyes, but with your brain interpreting what your eyes see. It often happens during migraines, fevers, or even symptoms of epilepsy. The good news is that it usually comes and goes, and for most people, it fades away with time. But while it's happening, it can make reality feel completely unreal. Just like falling down a rabbit hole like Alice did in the book Alice in Wonderland. Apotemnophilia, also known as body integrity identity disorder, is when someone has an intense, lifelong desire to amputate a healthy limb because they feel like it doesn't belong to them. It's not about wanting to be disabled, it's more like their brain insists that their body is wrong and would feel more complete without that arm, leg, or even multiple limbs. People with this condition often describe it as a constant, overwhelming feeling of disconnect, like the limb is a foreign object attached to them. Some go to extreme lengths and try to get doctors to remove it, and if they can't, they might even attempt dangerous self-amputations. It's a rare and deeply distressing condition, and scientists still don't fully understand why it happens. Some think it's linked to how the brain maps the body, like a wiring issue where certain limbs aren't properly registered as part of the person. Unfortunately, because it's so misunderstood, treatment is complicated and many people struggle in silence. As someone who's quite active in the tattoo community, I've had the displeasure of hearing of the Black Alien Project, who has tattooed almost his full body black and also cut off his nose and tattooed black into his eyes. I heard of the guy also wanting to remove some limbs too from a YouTuber called Cell, who is a great YouTuber I recommend if you are interested in tattoos. I don't want to be an armchair psychologist, so this is all speculations, but in my opinion I do believe the man does suffer from this illness alongside other disorders. Paris syndrome is like the ultimate case of disappointment, but on a whole other level. It happens when someone, usually a tourist, arrives in Paris expecting a magical romantic dream, only to be hit with the harsh reality it's just another busy city, full of noise, rude people and everyday problems. But this isn't just a feeling letdown. It's so extreme that some people experience full-blown psychological distress, including anxiety, hallucination, dizziness or even paranoia. It mostly happens to people who have built up unrealistic images of Paris, often due to movies, books or idolized cultural portrayals. When reality doesn't match, their brain just can't handle the shock. Japanese tourists in particular seem to experience it more often, possibly because of the massive cultural differences. Doctors think it's a mix of jet lag, a language barrier, cultural shock and sheer emotional overload. Most people do recover once they leave Paris and get back to their homes, but for those who experience it, it's a harsh reminder that sometimes high expectations can really mess with your mind. It might sound a little silly to many of you, but for those who have experienced this, it's really traumatic. Autophagia is when a person feels an uncontrollable urge to bite, chew, or eat parts of their own body. It usually starts with things like biting nails or chewing on lips, but in extreme cases, people go as far as gnawing on their own fingers, arms, or even tearing at their skin. It's not just a bad habit, it's a compulsive, sometimes uncontrollable behavior that can cause serious self-harm. The very mildest and most common cases of this disorder is simply things like nail biting, but people suffering from extreme cases from this have gone as far as chewing on their fingers until bone was visible. Consumed body matter that doesn't digest, like for example hair, and even cut chunks of meat from their own legs to eat. For some it's linked to extreme stress, trauma or certain medical disorders like OCD or schizophrenia. Others might not even fully realize they're doing it, almost like an automatic response to anxiety. It's similar to how some people pull on their hair, but taken to a much more severe and painful level. Since it's so rare and deeply tied to mental health, treatment usually involves therapy, medication, and sometimes even physical barriers to stop self-inflicted damage. But for those struggling with it, the urge can be incredibly hard to fight. You may already have heard of the name Folie En Deux if you saw the musical sequel to The Joker with Lady Gaga. Which, side note, was an amazing movie, of course, not as good as the first one, but still really solid. Folie En Deux, also known as a shared psychosis, is like catching a mental illness from someone else. It happens when two people, usually really close, like family members, couples or best friends, start sharing the same delusion. One person has a strong false belief and over time the other person gets pulled into it, fully believing it too, even if it makes no logical sense at all. But a much more terrifying disorder than just two people is a whole family. That is precisely what Folie En Famille is. This often starts by a dominant figure like a parent who has a strong false belief. Over time, the rest of the family, living in close isolation, absorbs and fully believes in the delusion, no matter how irrational it is. For example, a parent might be convinced that the government is trying to poison their food, and soon, the entire family stops eating anything from outside sources, truly believing they're in danger. Since they reinforce each other's fears, the delusion becomes unshakable. This usually happens in families that are very close-knit and cut off from outside influences. Without an outside perspective to challenge the belief, it just grows stronger. The best way to break it is to, break the family apart. A real-life case of Folie En Deux is a case that happened in Sweden in 2008 of May. Twin sisters Ursula and Sabina Eriksson from Sweden experienced a case of Folie En Deux. Out of nowhere, Ursula ran straight into the path of a massive truck, suffering serious injuries. Shockingly, just moments later, Sabina did the exact same thing, stepping in front of a moving car. Both survived with severe but non-life-threatening injuries. Experts later suggested that Sabina was a secondary in their shared psychosis, completely influenced by her twin sister Ursula, the primary. At the police station, Sabina made an eerie remark. "We say in Sweden that an accident rarely comes alone. Usually at least one more follows, maybe two." But the strange events didn't stop there. After being released from the hospital, Sabina started acting even more erratic. Until a disturbing turn of events, she went to stab a man to death. Now that was the end of this video. I really hope you enjoyed it and found it morbidly interesting. I wanted to thank you all who subscribed, and especially those who left such wonderful comments on my last video, which I will have up as a link on the end screen here. I love you all and I hope to see you stick around for a really long while. Thank you for watching and thank you for 100 subscribers. Goodbye.